Welcome to Sex with Rebecca, a show geared towards relationships and sexuality that'll help you enjoy your relationships more than you ever thought possible. Send us your difficult questions and we'll bring you expert answers unlike anywhere else. Whether you're looking for more passion or connection, kink or better self-expression, we got you covered. I'd like to begin by answering an email we received. Dear Rebecca, I've been married for 11 years. In that time, I've gone from wanting to be attached at the hip to doing my best to dodge sex because I'm no longer attracted to my husband. I guess that also ties into the fact that while I still love him, I'm no longer in love with him. Can our marriage last? Signed, Julia. Julia, not sure what you mean by attraction. Is it that he's physically let himself go, so he's no longer doing it for you? Or is it that you're no longer drawn to him as an individual? If it's the former, how about joining a gym together or taking up a physical activity that both of you can enjoy? Even something as simple as a daily post-dinner walk can be a good start, with the added bonus of giving you some time to connect with each other. If it's the latter, keep in mind that marriages are living, breathing entities that require care and nurturing, just like any other living, breathing entities. If we allow our hectic schedules, kids, bills, and life in general to take over, the passionate bond can die. That said, reviving a stale marriage takes a little bit of work, but couples do it every day. You'll just need to shift your focus from his flaws to his positive traits, and from blaming the lack of magic entirely on him to how you both need to work on it as a couple. Here with a few tips that'll help you do just that. Number one, deal with conflict. Address important issues, but don't sweat the small stuff. FYI, there are many issues that can never be resolved. So you just have to learn to live with them, like an allergy or a bad back, by managing inflammatory situations. Number two, appreciate him. Take notice of all the little things he does, from doing chores you hate, to asking you about your day, to sharing financial responsibility. For some reason, too many people feel that when one's doing what's expected of them, it doesn't count, and as such, doesn't need to be acknowledged or appreciated. 3, plan fun things. Just hanging out together isn't enough, even though it may feel more comfortable. Working as a team to recapture adventure and reinvigorate your marriage can work wonders. 4, change your lens. Instead of looking at all the ways he or his body have changed or how he's no longer able to rock your world, concentrate on what life would be like without the joys that he brings. Remember, this is the same guy you couldn't wait to hear the L word from or tie the knot with. Even when I do infidelity work, people who've been cheated upon suddenly realize that they don't want their relationship to be over, angry as they are, because they start to focus on everything they lose. Bottom line, attraction comes and goes. I'm sure from him to you as well. So if you truly want to save this marriage, don't just focus on the things that are changing. Stop taking him for granted. Take charge of creating some magic like you once did, and appreciate the positive changes also that are associated with long-term relationships, which balance everything out. To our audience, if you have any questions of your own, do write us, especially if it has to do with issues around your magnetic connection. Speaking of magnetic connections, they're not always healthy. So tonight, we'll be talking about unhealthy relationship patterns and how to break them with a world-class expert on the subject matter, Ross Rosenberg, author of The Human Magnet Syndrome, who's flown in all the way from Illinois to give us his words of wisdom. Welcome, Ross. It's so great to have you joining us today.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. It is a great pleasure of mine to be here.
Ever since I've read your book, I've been dying to meet you, so here you are. That's great. Let's get right into it. What exactly is human magnet syndrome, and why is it life-changing information?
The human magnet syndrome explains why codependents who are perpetual caregivers and helpers and patient individuals always fall in love with the opposite personality type, the narcissists who are caretakers. Like a dance, the person who gives needs a person that takes in order to feel comfortable in a relationship. And the human magnet syndrome explains simply why these relationships keep coming together. The opposite relationships are so compelling and a difficult habit to break.
I like the word magnet because they are truly magnetic. We see that in our clients. It's almost like you can't even pull them apart even when they feel unhealthy. It's truly sad to see that many of our clients are hooked on the wrong person. So I'm really glad that you're here to explain why that can happen.
Well, if you look at the codependent who only knows how to feel comfortable in a relationship is by taking care of people. It's like that their sense of self is proven when they make someone else happy.
So somehow tied into that. Mm-hmm.
Oh, absolutely. So if you could only feel happy and secure when you take care of someone, then what type of person will you want to feel comfortable with? You're going to almost automatically, I call it the chemistry of the relationship, falls into place with the narcissist. The caretaker only knows how to take care of people if that's their self-esteem. So when they meet the narcissist, that's going to feel comfortable. And if you turn it around, like two magnets, the narcissist only really knows how to take care of themselves, although they don't know it. And so when the two meet, you think of a magnet, you got the north side of the magnet, and the south side. When they're opposite, they're pulled together. And if they're too similar, it won't work. Narcissists don't. Yeah, narcissists, you get two narcissists on a date, well, first of all, they're going to dislike each other and accuse the other one of being a narcissist. But you get two codependents on a date, they're going to sit there and think, okay, well, what do I say next? I hope I'm not going to embarrass myself, and nothing happens. So it's a repulsion. So that's the magnet of the human magnet syndrome.
Because it's almost like a script or a dance where the two of them put each other in roles where they know how to do what they do best, in a way, essentially, right?
Yes.
Now, you've written a remarkable book on the subject matter that we'll be referring to throughout the show. So can you please tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. Well, the human magnet syndrome comes from my own experience of failing in marriages. In fact, it wasn't until I wrote the book that I told people I was divorced twice. It was a shameful secret of mine. But at the point of my second divorce, I experienced such deep embarrassment and humiliation, I decided to really get involved in therapy. And during that process, I learned that this predilection, this habit, this reflex for falling in love with narcissists actually comes from my childhood. It comes from the experience of being raised by a narcissist. And it was the process of this journey of learning and healing and growth that I figured out that if I'm going to solve this unconsciously motivated magnet attraction, I have to figure out what's going on inside of me. So that process, that learning, that growing, that healing led to my skills as a psychotherapist. And that led to me saying things that I started to write down. And people started to say, hey, that's kind of cool. And that's where the human magnet syndrome got started.
I thank you so much for being so forthright. It's not easy to talk about this stuff, but reading your book, I got the sense he really gets this stuff. And so I think that's where your personal experience speaks volumes in the book, and how, you guide people through the journey that they need because you've been there and you know what it looks like. Obviously, knowing this stuff is quintessential to the dating process, and you were mindful of that when you're writing your book because you discuss the chemistry concept and talk about it a little bit in the book. So can you tell us that?
Yes.
What that is?
Well, as I told you the other day, I wrote the Human Magnet Syndrome 6 years ago, and I now am writing the follow-up, the Human Magnet Syndrome, The Next Generation. And in the writing of this book, which is different from the first book, I am further delving into the magnetic pull. And I've come to understand that this chemistry thing that everyone talks about in a relationship, it's really the human magnet syndrome. It is this unconscious feeling that the person's right. And chemistry is broken into, as I call, 3 categories. Positive chemistry is when you're matched. That's when the codependent, the caretaker is matched with the care needer, the giver and the taker. And all of a sudden you feel, oh my gosh, this person who's a narcissist is so bold and charismatic and sexy. Charming. Oh my gosh. Boy, they're hot. And then the narcissist goes, oh, someone who can listen to all of my problems and the fact that I've been fired 4 times and have had 5 divorces, and she's so compassionate, she is hot. That's the chemistry. If you get opposite magnets, there's chemistry. Without the magnetic connection, there's a repulsion, and people will tell you, there wasn't much chemistry. That person felt more like a friend.
That's why I say to people, if there's a chemistry of 10, you really want to revisit that. Now, before we go to break, can you make a really quick comment around why you feel that most online dating sites have the matching process all wrong?
Yes. They go by matching what we think we are. it's really our chemistry. It's our human magnet syndrome. It doesn't matter if the person has all of the traits that we want most. It's our unconscious selves. It's our codependent self is going to match with the narcissist. Our healthy, caring self is going to match with another healthy self. So it's the unconscious human magnet syndrome explained chemistry that will make a relationship start off, not what's in their profile and the matching of it.
Which may be good on paper, but in reality it's not. And this is when people say, I feel like I've known you my entire life. You have, because they mimic someone. Now hold on to those thoughts. Great information, Ross. When we return, we'll be discussing why we picked the wrong people. So don't go anywhere. Welcome back to Sex with Rebecca, geared towards making your relationships more robust than you ever thought possible. In this episode, we're talking about why people are drawn to those who are wrong for us with Ross Rosenberg, author of The Human Magnet Syndrome. Ross, let's get down to the brass tacks on why we pick wrong people. I mean, you talk about the broken picker and the narcometer caught my attention. Let's discuss that next.
You know, when I was coming up with the ideas that were coming together in my book, right before that, one of my own therapists, who I was trying to see to help figure out my problem, told me the problem with you, Ross, is you have a broken picker. It always goes to the wrong woman. You're always picking the same woman, but a different face. And I thought, okay, that's true.
Compulsion, yes.
That's true. So how do I fix my broken picker? And that, of course, took many more months and years to figure out, and that had to do with what I talked about earlier, is understanding how my childhood experience with my own narcissistic parent formed my blindness to healthy people and my preference for unhealthy people.
We gravitate to that familiar, don't we?
Yes.
Now, it sounds like in what you've been talking about with codependence that, you know, they kind of have to own part of the problem. So you are holding them responsible for their own relationship hell, meaning you don't see them as victims. So if they're not victims, then what exactly are they?
You know, that's one thing that I'm really proud of is my work helps codependents because it shows them that their problem is partially their fault, and if it is partially their fault, then they can stop something and they can move towards having true love, healthy love, this soulmate they want. And until you realize that it is the codependent's attraction to the narcissist that starts it all off, then you won't get healthier. And there's so much out there that is constantly telling people, well, it's a narcissist's fault, the bad narcissist. And yes.
You hear that all the time, but the way you put it, it's very empowering for the person who normally plays the victim, because if it's partly you're involved in some way, then you can fix that as well. We know that codependency extends way beyond what we've been talking about. So can you please discuss how pathological loneliness and core shame are connected to it next?
I've come to understand that codependency is really just a symptom. And that is why most codependency therapy doesn't work, because we're working on the symptoms. In order to make lasting change, we have to go deeper and deeper. And the core experience of the codependent is deep, painful, body-aching loneliness that comes from shame that they're aware of and they're not aware of. And that can be traced back to their childhood experience with their own pathological narcissist.
It all comes back to that. Now, despite everything you pointed out, people still can't seem to help themselves, which is why your model refers to codependency as an addiction, meaning we know it's bad for us, but we can't seem to help ourselves like other addictions. And it is hard to quit. You say that codependency addiction is one of the most difficult addictions to quit.
Absolutely.
How is that?
The codependent who has pathological loneliness and core shame, they find a solution to that is a relationship. As long as they're with someone they can take care of, they don't have to think about how much they hurt. And the human magnet syndrome, as we know, always will bring the codependent to the narcissist. It's the relationship that takes the pain away, much like a drug takes the pain away. So when a codependent leaves that relationship, they re-experience a loneliness that, as I said, is horribly painful, and they're compelled to either go back to the relationship or find another relationship, which will be with the narcissist. So it is like it's a form of self-medication that is just like an addiction.
And going back to the familiar, because somehow it seems to feel safe. And that's why people do find it. And the way you were saying, we have that repetition compulsion where we find that same person over and over again. I mean, the alcoholic's daughter says, I'll never marry an alcoholic, but 9 out of 10 times she does. Exactly. And obviously, because this is stuff from childhood, it's ingrained in us. We're looking at the same thing. I love the elegance with which you simplify it instead of making it complicated, because it really is very straightforward, but very poignant and deep and meaningful.
Thank you.
When we return, we'll be discussing the cure to this malady and self-recovery work. I know you'll want to stick around for that. Welcome back to Sex with Rebecca, a show where we bring you expert advice on important matters to help your relationship be more intimate, exciting, and emotionally fulfilling. We've been talking about the human magnet syndrome with Ross Rosenberg, author of the book by the same title. Ross, you promised us a way to heal. We've been talking about all the issues. So tell us about your codependency cure and the self-love recovery work that you have come up with. That's really quite remarkable.
As I said earlier, my discovery of the human magnet syndrome came from my own psychotherapy. And how I solved my codependency was to realize that at the very foundation of it was this trauma from my childhood that created core shame and loneliness in my addiction. So I started to focus on resolving that trauma, that shame, and that loneliness. And so what I do in my psychotherapy is I replicate that process by working on the foundational elements of the problem. Because any other type of therapy is called Band-Aid therapy. Mm-hmm. It will protect, it feels good, but it always falls off.
Because it's just addressing the symptom, it's not going after the cause, which is what you do when you're talking about the foundational family of origin work. Now, your book has done really well, and you've been listening to your audience feedback, which has led you to the next one. You alluded to that, the next generation version. How is that, can you tell us real quick, how is that different from the first one? What are the key points that you're hitting this time?
When I wrote The Human Magnet Syndrome, I was not an author. I was a brand new trainer traveling all around the United States, and I wrote it in 9 months. 6 years later, I put together another version of the book that has all the main points, but it is so much more detailed and connected with examples and experience. And it is, I think of it as one is written at an 8th grade level. This one's written as a college level, and I'm proud of it. But this goes so much more deeply into the matter and has so much more helpful content for the reader. So I'm really proud of it, and I can't wait to see it published.
I can't wait to see it either. I was so impressed with the first one, so I'm really excited that the next one goes even deeper. Now, you shared what made you write this book. Part of it has to do with your own story. So can you give us a quick little snippet into, you talked about how the therapy piece came from yourself, but what got you writing this in the first place, like before even therapy? You said there's a personal piece in there. Can you share us like a real quick comment on that?
Well, when I was 17, I wrote a poem on loneliness, and who would have known that I would have eventually become a writer. And I did this training, and they told me to write a book. And it was then I realized that this inner writer, this inner intuitive person, could take his own experience of healing and write it in a way that would help people solve their own, to know what it is. You can't solve a problem if you don't know it. So to explain it and to give an example. And
that resonates.
I guess I'm lucky that I was able to do it in a way that so many people were helped by it.
Yeah, because it really resonates, and I think the personal touch shows up in that. Now, I've been super impressed with your book, and that's why I've recommended it to a lot of my clients who have absolutely been blown away by all the information that you have in it. So I'm sure that our audience would love to grab their own copies. How can they purchase your book?
Well, my Self-Love Recovery Institute, its website is selfloverecovery.com, has that book and my many other personal and professional development products and resources.
You have a lot of video clips there as well, teaching people a whole bunch of different things. And again, it's very well done. And of course, the book is amazing as a reference journal as well. Speaking of which, coming up, some final words on avoiding unhealthy relationship patterns. So do stick around for that. Welcome back to Sex with Rebecca, a show geared towards making your relationships the best that they can be, both in and out of the bedroom. We've been discussing the human magnet syndrome with Ross Rosenberg, an expert in the area, with a book by the same title. So before we wrap up, I'd like us to leave you with some key points and homework exercises. Take it away, Ross. Hit us with some high points, and they're going to have to buy the book for the rest.
Well, the most simple I can be is by telling your viewers the most essential saying they should know. It's never too late to be the person I should have been. And you should say that to yourself while you look in the mirror. And it is the process of starting to love yourself that will empower you to move forward with the most difficult fight of your life, this codependency addiction. You have to love yourself and you have to believe yourself.
It starts there, doesn't it? Because the relationship we have with ourselves is the most important relationship because it determines all others.
Absolutely. And if you don't love yourself, how can you have the strength to fight your inner demons that want you to stay with the narcissist?
Awesome. Any other tips for people or homework tips, something where they can kind of say, okay, that's me. I think we know when it's us. We know when we're constantly ending up in those bad relationships. Our family, our friends, they're saying, you know what, you're headed down the same road. And which is why when people say, I talked all night, and it's as if we've known each other our entire lives.
Sure.
So that's a clue right there. Anything else that you want to leave our audience with?
Our body tells us what our mind is incapable of, and we have to trust our intuitive feeling. And I call this a narcometer. It's an internal feeling that we're in danger. If you feel uncomfortable and your stomach gets tight or it's hard to breathe and you're around someone who makes you uncomfortable, listen to that, because until you make progress in this therapy for codependency, trust your instinct and let yourself protect yourself. Protect the most important part of your whole life. That's yourself, that's your heart. And that's going to get you past the hardest part of this codependency recovery process.
So it's just listening to yourself, that felt sense that's telling you that something doesn't feel off. I also say to people, if you're constantly left wondering, what place do I hold in my partner's heart or in their life? Where do I fit in? Where do I belong? And they're wondering, does this person love me? Do they not? If you're left guessing, this person is not in any way connected enough for you to know that, hey, this is where I fit in. And that, again, can be a danger sign as well. So once somebody has discovered real quick, they know that they're in a bad relationship. Do they need to move away from the relationship, or do they need to work on themselves? What do they need to do?
Well, they need to understand that there is something bigger than themselves pushing them to stay. And since it's an addiction, we wouldn't tell an alcoholic to just stop drinking. We would tell an alcoholic to find an addictions therapist who can get you an addictions treatment. So to acknowledge the pathological nature of codependency is to find a therapist or a licensed professional who can help you create a safe foundation so that you can do the most difficult fight of your life. Because I promise you that codependents suffer and they are hurt by the narcissist once they decide to protect themselves, to fight for self-love. And
it's worth it. And of course, buy your book. I think it's a great place to really gain an understanding and then work with a professional like yourself. Thank you so much, Ross, for all your remarkable insights, and viewers for joining us. Be sure to tune in again next week, and don't forget to email us your questions and subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch up on missed episodes, watch your favorite shows again, and to help us pass on the word. Let's create a sexual revival. I'm Rebecca Rosenblat, your host, wishing you happy, healthy, and passionate relationships. Until next time.